Welcome to the Business Lounge. My guest is Godfrey Bloom, the United Kingdom Independence Party member of the European Parliament, one of a number, and it's great to see you, Godfrey, and thank you for coming to talk to us. We'll talk a lot about politics and a lot about the MEP's role that you have in a moment or two. I want to go back there before that, and where are you a Yorkshireman through and through, or did you migrate?
No, born in London.
Right.
I'm a Londoner, but I have Yorkshire roots. My grandfather was a Sheffield steel master, and so yes, I've got Yorkshire blood, which you'll normally find out if you're in the bar with me. Yes, I think I've got a little bit of Yorkshire blood, and I've lived up here for about 30 years. I married a half Polish and half Yorkshire lass.
Right.
Which can be an interesting
interesting conversations at the dinner table. What about your time in when you started work? I mean, what was your first job?
Well, I started at Lloyd's of London in the 1960s, one of the first management trainees. No, everybody's a management trainee or starts with it. In those days, nobody had heard of that.
Yeah.
And I graduated to the investment department of Lloyd's of London, and I've been in investment in some format ever since. I describe myself as a financial economist, as opposed to an academic economist or journalist economist. And I've been in some format in the city when people in the city knew what they were doing, I would argue, and over 30 years. So it's been a 35 year career. London for me is still the capital of the world. And of course, being UKIP, I would argue capital of the empire.
Yes.
I love it. In my day, you had to wear a bowler hat when you started. Or you didn't have to wear it; you had to carry it. I go back to the 1960s.
Oh right, okay.
Nobody wears a hat in London now,
no,
except me. And I still, when I'm in the city of London, I wear my bowler hat. Yorkshire's been kind to me. I love the countryside. I'm a great field sportsman, so it's a great place to be. I've acquired a taste for beer with a head on it,
right?
Which, of course, we don't get in London. Nice creamy head that you drink all the way down to the bottom.
Yes.
Some people might think that's not a particularly good reason for living somewhere, but I do. I think it's good enough. It's its own way. I like cricket. I'm president of the local sort of cricket club, which I elected myself, lifetime president.
Of course.
Which is quite fun. An occasional side. And I served with the Yorkshire Territorial Regiment for many years in Hull, 150 Regiment. I've got some good roots in Yorkshire, and I enjoy it. Hunt with the Middleton. I shoot when I get invited, which isn't often, because I can't afford to shoot unless I'm invited.
It's amazing just in the moments that we've been talking. You shoot when you can, you play cricket, you talk of the empire. Quintessentially English, is that how you would describe yourself?
Yes, I hope so. I've got a great faith in the British people.
No, that's what I was going to say. English or British?
I suppose English arguably, but obviously the Scots and the Welsh need leadership, and I think that's what the English supply.
You don't believe in separate governments then for them?
I believe in separate governments if that's what people want. And I believe if the Scots want separate government, they really do want separate government, then that's how they must go. I'm a libertarian. I'm a great believer in libertarianism. I believe that people, as long as it doesn't upset what anybody else wants, they should be able to do pretty well much what they like. And if the Scots want to go on their own, the union has been very successful over 400 or so years. Very successful union indeed. I would be sorry to see it break up personally. I don't think it's frightfully practical, but if that's what they want, then they must go.
You've been in politics for, about 6 years, you were saying?
Yeah, 6 to 7 years.
Why go into that? What first got you interested in it?
Well, Nigel Farage, my controversial boss at UKIP, he suggested that who I've known for some years anyway, in another capacity, he suggested I stood. He said, Goddard, you can't go on moaning in the pub. Sooner or later you've got to do something. So we've got a proportional representation system with European politics, so you've got more chance of getting elected. There's no chance of getting elected unless basically you're red and blue at a Westminster election. You either stick a red rosette on or a blue one. And in fact, there are areas, and I live in one, where frankly it's been conservative forever. If you put a blue rosette in a dog poo, it would get elected. And the same if you cross the river, if you put a red one in a dog poo, it would get elected. Proportional representation, which is a weird system, and I'm not suggesting I'm in favour of it, but it got me elected. You can actually stand up and say, I believe in this, this and this, and have a chance of getting elected. Mm-hmm. And I got 250,000 votes in 2004, much to my surprise. My campaign team was me, my mother-in-law and my dog. But it went very well, and I got re-elected quite recently, and with an increased, I say we, I mean UKIP, not me, it's not me personally, it's the party on that system, and quite rightly so.
But did you was your thought always about Europe, or about UKIP and then Europe, or did you think about domestic politics first?
Well, no, not really. I've never been involved in politics at all, although I like to think I've always been interested from a geopolitical, historical perspective. I like to believe I'm reasonably well read in these matters. But being a financial economist or strategist by profession, I was asked to look for a very prestigious merchant bank in the 90s about the implications of a common currency, the euro. I sort of developed quite a platform and expertise on that with my staff and statisticians and mathematicians, and looked at that and came to the conclusion in the mid-1990s that it couldn't work, and I gave it about 10 years from inception. And of course I'm right again, and my wife often says to me, the reason you have no friends is because you're always right.
So you're elected to the European Parliament as part of UKIP. Nigel Farage, as you say, is your boss in this respect. Indeed. What did you think? I mean, you've been involved in investment all your life for 30-odd years, and suddenly you have a completely different role to fill as well, and that is fighting, I guess, for the cause of your country, the country you love so much. How did you feel about that?
Certainly the thing that struck me amazingly, having only just not been involved in politics, and I thought the City of London was a fairly hard world, a fairly cutthroat world. It's nothing like politics. The trouble with politics is, in my experience, which is, as I say, only 7 years, is the intellectual dishonesty that you get in politics. We're sending parliamentarians to prison at the moment for having stolen money out of the petty cash, basically, right. And rightly so. But of course that isn't the problem that the country has, it's the intellectual dishonesty. It's this constant belief that you can say something at an election and then completely abandon it as soon as you come to power. And we've just seen this from David Cameron. We were going to have a Bill of Rights, weren't we? We were going to have all sorts of things that David Cameron's going to do. He's abandoned them all. And this is the norm, to the extent I find extraordinary that when somebody took a private prosecution to the High Court because the previous administration didn't meet their commitments, their manifesto commitments, the High Court judge actually said you mustn't expect politicians to meet their commitments on a manifesto. It would be absurd to assume that they would. Well, of course in business, and people watching this will be business people, if you don't meet your contract, you're in breach of contract, you're in breach of the law, and you suffer the penalties. Politicians seem to be above all this. They can seem to do what they like. Lord Mandelson came back, having had to resign on a number of occasions through things, by doing things which 30 years before, 40 years ago in the days of Profumo, lying to the House, you would have to wear dark glasses, grow a beard and go to Canada for the rest of your life.
But surely you didn't get into politics to try and change that. You wouldn't be able to, would you?
Well, no, I didn't get into politics to change it because I didn't know it was quite so bad.
Yeah.
So there isn't very much I can do with that except expose it where I find it. And so if I can expose intellectual deceit, I like to do so, and that's really, I see my role. One of the problems that we have, in my opinion, is that people don't have access to information. If they had access to information, they would not very often hold the views that they do. And there's a number of fundamental subjects on which people simply do not have information because the press and the media are controlled, not in a Soviet sense, but in a sort of subliminal sense.
Is that because journalists have become frightened of rocking the boat?
I think the problem is that they become part of the establishment. They're the flip side of the other coin. And I think that's probably that's half the problem. What's the upside of taking a radical view? What is the upside of coming outside the mainstream? If I may sort of give you an example, it's not quite fair because I'm not talking about a journalist, but let's take one journalist, Peter Sissons, whose memoirs have just come out. He said, you suggest that something that the received wisdom isn't so. You're very quickly frosted out. And if you look at David Bellamy, who takes a contrary view, just example, on climate change, suddenly has not been employed by the BBC since. You couldn't get him off the television up until about 15 years ago, and he's never been on it since. So if you don't take the establishment view, you're very soon frosted out. And of course you can whistle Dixie for your CPE as well.
Let's go back to Brussels and talk about you in Brussels, because you're not backward in coming forward, are you?
Not usually.
You like speaking your mind. It's got you into most recently it's got you into trouble. You were asked to leave the chamber, weren't you?
Indeed I was.
For comments that you were meant to have made about a German individual.
Yes.
Why did you do it?
Well, the German in question was making a point, and all I did was translate his point into German, which of course was exactly the sort of buzz phrase of German politics of the 1930s. One government, one people, which is the point that Herr Schulz was making. But of course we would expect, as Brits, we would expect in our chamber, the knockabout in the chamber, which I think is good and healthy. Some people criticise it, I don't. I think Westminster Parliament is right. I think you should be able to have knockabout. But what we had there was a situation where I had made a remark to a fellow politician in a parliament, in a protected environment. I was asked to leave. I was banned from the parliament before a vote. My franchise, I'm representing Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire people to vote, and I was asked to leave the chamber just before a vote, which even my fellow parliamentarians in the European Parliament, who don't support me and my political enemies, thought was unbelievable. The Italians walked out on my behalf. None of this came in the press. None of this was reported by the BBC. The Italians walked out in disgust. A number of Green Party people were in my support because it was undemocratic. There were one or two brave Conservatives who tried to speak on my behalf who had their microphones cut off. None of this was reported in this country. It just looked like I'd been thrown out for being a bad guy. Nobody's even talked about the implications for democracy. You can be thrown out before a vote, before the major vote takes place, by political opponents on a show of hands.
Is this the European Parliament being undemocratic then?
Totally undemocratic.
So it's all a farce. Well, you would say that anyway, being part of UKIP.
But let me take a more penetrating role here. I would argue our law is made in this country by parliamentarians, elected parliamentarians in Westminster. It goes to the House of Lords, which is our amending chamber, as everybody knows, and it goes from green paper to white paper to bill. Then the bill is assented, and that's how we get our law. Now, 75% of our laws now come from Europe. They're made by the Commission and the Commission bureaucracy in secret, and they come to my Parliament, which is an amending chamber. And I find visiting congressmen from the United States simply can't understand this. They cannot understand that we do not have an elected, democratically elected administration making our law. And of course now we've had, so where is the democracy? Even our own Prime Minister is horrified that we're giving votes to prisoners. Most of the country is horrified we're giving votes to prisoners. Nobody wants it, but we've got to have it because we're bound by the Treaty of Lisbon, the new constitution, and it is a constitution, make no mistake, because we're bound under the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So how democratic is that? The whole thing is totally undemocratic and becoming more undemocratic. And I've actually heard Lord Mandelson, when he was a commissioner, refer to the post-democratic era.
Has it just become too powerful then? And it can't be overthrown? The European Parliament is there, it can't... Nothing can touch it.
It's very difficult to... we never undo laws. It's the sort of ratchet effect. More and more law. Nothing ever gets rescinded. It's a prescriptive system of law, so there's a hell of a lot of law coming out. 2,000 laws, 2,000 regulations a year come out. We've had more regulations than law passed in the last 13 years than we had from the entire period between the Bill of Rights in 1688 to 1997. So it churns law out. On Thursday I was voting I was voting yet again on the standardisation of bananas. I've been voting on the standardisation of tractor seats, spirit bottles. There is no avenue of interference that the European Union will not come into your lives, and particularly your herbal medicine, vitamin supplements. All these things are being regulated. And what I believe is, as a libertarian, is that we want fewer regulations, fewer laws to free up growth in the economy. The only way we can move forward, we can have more money for our families, is to get government off our backs. We've got to have less government, fewer government. And of course, you don't know anything. If you look through the book, it doesn't matter whether it's the European Parliament or the Westminster Parliament, try and find anybody who's done a real job. I mean, did do a real. I mean, we now have a leader and a chancellor, none of whom done it. Went to Oxford, good school, Oxford, fiddled around in political research all their lives, and here they are, Prime Minister and Chancellor. In my company, I wouldn't have employed them to clean the car.
So what's the future for us in Europe, for Britain and Europe?
I'm a big believer in Europe. I'm not anti-Europe. Culturally, entrepreneurially, Europe is a wonderful place. And I'm a great supporter of it. In fact, I think it's this centralism all the time that is stifling Europe, and it could really grow forward. I think it will lurch forward when this yoke is taken away. And as for the British, it's the sheer cost. I mean, it's £45 million a day just to be members. £45 million a day just to be members. And the cost of implementation, of course, is the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs, reckon it's 25 billion a year. Civitas reckon it's about 25 billion a year. Only the other day you might have seen in Stoke-on-Trent they spent over £1 million replacing the light bulbs because of the EU Energy Directive. It's £1 million getting rid of perfectly good light bulbs to put new light bulbs in, and that goes on all over the country all the time. I could bore you all day with examples of that. So I think we would be freed up as an economy.
But if you're, as you said before, if you don't think that you're making that much of a difference, why bother? Would it not make a bigger impact for UKIP to say we're not going to be part of it anymore?
We did agonise over that, but if we weren't there, we and our European cousins from other parties, and the group with whom we share, that's the only opposition in the Parliament. There would be no other opposition, and I think that would be even more fatal for the whole thing to go. Most of the stuff goes through on the nod now anyway, but at least we can stand up and shout about it and come back here and explain how it works.
Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you, and thank you for spending time with us. Godfrey Bloom.